What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world betrayed you in the most devastating way possible? And what if, 10 years later, you discovered that everything you believed about that betrayal was wrong? Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the lengths people will go to protect the ones they love. This is a story about a father who built an empire, a daughter who destroyed it in a single night, and a truth so dark that it took a decade to surface. Some of you might think you can predict where this is going. You might think you've heard stories like this before, but I promise you, you haven't, because what starts as a simple case of greed and betrayal becomes something far more sinister, far more complex, and far more heartbreaking than you could ever imagine. Before we dive into this incredible true story, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our most shocking cases. And if you're already part of our community, show some love by hitting that like button. It really helps us bring you more of these mind-bending stories. Now, let me take you back to a cold December night 10 years ago, when a millionaire business world was about to crumble in ways he never saw coming. Because sometimes, the people closest to us are hiding secrets so dangerous, so explosive, that when they finally come to light, they change everything. Are you ready? Because once we start this journey together, there's no going back. And I guarantee that by the end of this story, you'll never look at family the same way again. Picture this: you've spent 30 years building your empire from nothing. Every dawn, you wake up knowing that your sacrifices, your sleepless nights, your relentless dedication, all of it was for one person, your daughter. Your pride and joy, your reason for living. Now imagine waking up one morning to discover that this same person, the one you would have given your life for, has systematically destroyed everything you've ever worked for. In a single night, this is exactly what happened to Robert Blackwood on December 15, 2014, a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune through decades of smart investments and tireless work. But more than money, Robert had something he valued infinitely more. His daughter Sarah Blackwood was by all accounts the perfect daughter. Valedictorian of her high school class. Full scholarship to Harvard Business School. She spoke 4 languages fluently, volunteered at local charities every weekend, and had never, not once, given her father a reason to doubt her character. At 28 years old, Sarah lived in the family mansion with her father. She managed his personal finances, handled his investment portfolio, and was being groomed to take over the family business. Robert trusted her with everything. His bank accounts, his business decisions, his deepest secrets. She had complete access to his financial empire. And why wouldn't she? This was his daughter, his flesh and blood, the person he'd raised to be his successor, his legacy. But on that cold December night, while Robert slept peacefully in his bed, Sarah was quietly, methodically, destroying his entire world. She moved through his home office like a ghost. Every click of the keyboard was calculated. Every transfer was precise. She knew exactly which accounts to access, which investments to liquidate, which safety deposits to empty. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was surgical. By 3 a.m., Sarah had transferred every single penny from her father's accounts. $12 million. Gone. Vanished into a web of offshore accounts that would make tracking the money nearly impossible. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. Sarah didn't just steal the money, she erased herself, her social media profiles, deleted, her phone, destroyed, her personal belongings, nothing left behind except the clothes on her back. When Robert woke up that morning and discovered what had happened, he didn't just lose his fortune, he lost his daughter. He lost his faith in everything he thought he knew about love, about family, about trust. The police investigation hit dead ends immediately. Sarah had used her business education to cover her tracks perfectly. She had new identification, new bank accounts, and a head start that made her virtually impossible to find. But here's what haunts me about this story, and what should terrify all of us in today's world. How well do we really know the people closest to us? In an age where we share everything on social media, where we think we know everyone's business, Sarah Blackwood proved that the most dangerous secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. Think about your own family right now, your children, your parents, your siblings. You trust them with your passwords, your personal information, your financial details. But what if everything you think you know about them, is wrong? Robert Blackwood thought he knew his daughter better than anyone in the world. He was dead wrong. And that mistake cost him everything. But this story doesn't end here. Because 10 years later, something happened that would make Robert question not just what Sarah had done, but why she had done it. Something that would reveal a truth so shocking, so unimaginable, that it would turn this entire story upside down. What Robert discovered in that black envelope would prove that sometimes the people we call villains, are actually heroes in disguise. 6 months after Sarah vanished, Robert Blackwood made a decision that would change everything. He hired Marcus Kane, one of the most expensive private investigators in the country. A man who specialized in cases that the police had given up on. A man who never, ever, stopped hunting. Marcus had tracked down missing persons across 6 continents. He'd found people who had been hiding for decades. He'd solved cases that seemed absolutely impossible. But what he discovered about Sarah Blackwood would shake him to his core? The first breakthrough came 3 weeks into the investigation. Marcus was reviewing Sarah's digital footprint when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Sarah hadn't just disappeared. She had been planning this for years. Hidden in the metadata of photos she'd posted on social media, Marcus found embedded coordinates. Coordinates that led to locations in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. But here's the terrifying part. These photos were taken over a period of 4 years. Sarah had been visiting these places, setting up her escape route, while living under her father's roof. While pretending to be the perfect daughter. Think about that for a moment. 4 years of carefully planned deception. 4 years of looking her father in the eye every morning, knowing exactly what she was going to do to him. In our world of instant everything, of spontaneous decisions, and emotional reactions, Sarah had been playing a game of chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But Marcus was just getting started. What he found next was even more disturbing. In Singapore, Sarah had been seen at the offices of a high-end identity forger. Not once, not twice, but 7 different times over 2 years. The forger, when pressured, revealed that Sarah had purchased 3 complete identity packages. 3 different names, 3 different nationalities, 3 different life histories. Jessica Morgan, a Canadian art dealer. Elena Rodriguez, a Spanish investment banker. Katerina Petrov, a Russian philanthropist. Each identity was so perfectly crafted, so meticulously documented, that they could pass any background check. Sarah wasn't just running. She was becoming someone else. Multiple someone else's. But here's where this story becomes truly chilling. Marcus tracked down security footage from the airports in all 3 countries. And what he saw on those cameras made him question everything he thought he knew about human nature. Sarah wasn't traveling alone. In Switzerland, she was with a man, in his 50s. In the Cayman Islands, she was with a different man, this one in his 30s. In Singapore, she was with a woman who appeared to be her mother's age. Different people, different relationships, different covers for each location. Who were these people? How had a 20-year-old woman built an international network of accomplices? And more importantly, why? Marcus spent the next 2 months following the money trail. What he discovered was a financial maze so complex, so sophisticated, that it would have impressed the world's top forensic accountants. Sarah had created a web of shell companies, dummy corporations, and investment vehicles that spread across 14 different countries. But then, Marcus found something that didn't make sense, something that broke the pattern. In every location Sarah had visited, substantial charitable donations had been made. Millions of dollars donated to children's hospitals, domestic violence shelters, and organizations that helped missing persons. Why would someone who had just stolen $12 million give most of it away? This is where our story takes a turn that will make you question everything you think you know about right and wrong, because in today's world, we're so quick to judge. We see a headline, we make up our minds, we move on. But what if the villain in the story, isn't actually the villain? Marcus realized he wasn't just tracking a thief. He was tracking someone who had orchestrated one of the most complex operations he'd ever seen. Someone with resources, connections, and a level of planning that suggested this wasn't about money at all. Someone who was running not just from the law, but from something far more dangerous. The final piece of the puzzle came when Marcus discovered Sarah's last known location. A small town in rural Montana, where she had been living under her 3rd identity for almost a year. But when he arrived to investigate, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Sarah's safe house had been burned to the ground. Recent burn marks. Recent enough that the ashes were still warm. And in those ashes, Marcus found something that would change everything Robert Blackwood thought he knew about his daughter. A single photograph, partially burned, but still recognizable. A photograph that proved Sarah wasn't the criminal in this story. She was the victim, and everything, absolutely everything, was about to make terrifying sense. Sometimes, the most important clues are hiding in plain sight. Sometimes, what looks like an ending is actually the beginning of the most shocking truth you'll ever hear. 3 days after Sarah disappeared, Robert found something in her bedroom that nearly destroyed what was left of his sanity. A letter, handwritten, addressed to him, a suicide note in our digital age, where everything is typed, texted, or voice-recorded. Sarah had chosen to write her final words by hand, on paper. That would later prove to be far more significant than anyone could have imagined. The letter was devastating. Sarah apologized for the pain she was about to cause. She talked about feeling trapped, about being unable to face the shame of what she had done. She begged her father to forgive her, and she promised that by the time he read those words, she would be gone forever. Robert held that letter in his shaking hands and wept. His daughter wasn't just a thief. She was dead, or so he thought. But here's where this story takes a turn that will make your skin crawl. Because 2 years later, when Robert had finally begun to accept his daughter's death, he decided to frame that letter, to keep it as his last connection to Sarah. And when he took it to a professional framer, they noticed something extraordinary. The paper had a watermark, an almost invisible marking that could only be seen under special lighting. And when they enhanced that watermark, it revealed a series of numbers and letters that didn't belong on any suicide note. 47.6062N, 122.3321 WGPS coordinates. But that wasn't all. Hidden in the seemingly random spacing between words, there was a pattern. A code so subtle, so cleverly disguised, that it had taken 2 years for anyone to notice it. When decoded, it revealed a single, chilling message: "They're watching. Trust no one." The truth is buried where it all began. Think about this for a moment. Sarah had written what appeared to be a suicide note, but had actually embedded a secret message for her father to find. A message that suggested she wasn't dead. A message that suggested she was in hiding. But hiding from what? From whom? In today's world, we're constantly being watched. Our phones track our locations, our computers monitor our searches, our social media reveals our thoughts. We've become so accustomed to surveillance that we barely notice it anymore. But Sarah knew something that terrified her enough to fake her own death, something that made her believe that every word she wrote, every move she made, was being monitored. Robert immediately traveled to those coordinates. They led him to a storage unit in Seattle. A storage unit that Sarah had rented under a false name 3 months before she disappeared. Inside, Robert found something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his family. There were documents, hundreds of them, financial records, photographs, legal papers, and correspondence, dating back 25 years, documents that revealed a truth so dark, so unthinkable, that Robert had to sit down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and process what he was seeing. His business empire, his fortune, his entire life, had been built on a lie. A lie so massive, so carefully constructed, that it had taken his brilliant daughter years to uncover it. But the most shocking discovery was a series of photographs, professional surveillance photos, photos of Sarah going about her daily life, taken over a period of months leading up to her disappearance. Someone had been watching her. Someone had been tracking her every move. Someone who knew that she had discovered the truth at the bottom of the storage unit, wrapped in plastic. Robert found Sarah's laptop. The laptop she claimed had been stolen weeks before she disappeared. When he powered it on, he found video files, recordings Sarah had made in secret, documenting everything she had discovered. In the final video, recorded just hours before she emptied his accounts, Sarah looked directly into the camera with tears streaming down her face. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words would echo in Robert's mind forever. "Dad, if you're watching this, it means I succeeded in making you think I was dead. I'm so sorry for what I had to do. But they were going to kill me. They were going to kill both of us. The money I took. It was never yours to begin with. It was stolen from people who needed it. People who died because of what our family built. I couldn't let that continue. I couldn't let you live with that blood on your hands without knowing the truth." The video continued for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes that revealed a conspiracy so vast, so deeply rooted in Robert's past. that it reached into the highest levels of government, corporate America, and international organized crime. Sarah hadn't stolen from her father? She had discovered that her father, unknowingly, had been stealing from everyone else for decades. And when she tried to make it right, she became a target. But here's the question that will keep you awake tonight. If someone you loved discovered that your entire life was built on a foundation of lies and blood money, would you want them to save you? Even if it meant destroying everything you thought you knew about yourself. Because that storage unit contained one more item. One final piece of evidence that would prove Sarah was still alive, still running, and still trying to protect the father who thought she had betrayed him. A recent newspaper, dated just 6 months ago, with a handwritten note in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting. The truth is coming, Dad. And when it does, you'll understand why I had to break your heart to save your soul. December 15, 2024. Exactly 10 years to the day since Sarah disappeared. Robert Blackwood woke up that morning thinking it would be just another day of living with the weight of everything he had discovered. Another day of wondering if his daughter was alive or dead. Another day of carrying the guilt of a fortune built on blood. He had no idea that by sunset, his entire understanding of reality would be obliterated. At 3:17 p.m., there was a knock. At his door, not the doorbell, not a delivery notification on his phone, an old-fashioned knock. 3 deliberate raps that seemed to echo through his empty mansion like gunshots. When Robert opened the door, there was no one there. Just a black envelope lying on his doorstep. No postmark, no return address, no delivery truck driving away. Just an envelope that seemed to have materialized out of thin air in our age of digital everything, of tracked packages and electronic signatures. Someone had gone old school. Someone wanted to make sure this delivery couldn't be traced, couldn't be monitored, couldn't be intercepted by whoever might still be watching. Robert's hands shook as he held that envelope, because deep down, he knew this moment would come. He knew Sarah was still out there, still protecting him, still one step ahead of the people who wanted them both dead. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was inside. A single photograph, high quality, recent, professional grade, the kind of photograph that costs thousands of dollars to produce and requires connections that most people don't have. The photograph showed a man in his 70s, sitting at a desk in what appeared to be a government office. The man was signing documents, important documents, judging by the official seals and the serious expressions of everyone in the room. But here's what made Robert's blood turn to ice. He recognized that man. That was Thomas Brennan. The man who had been Robert's business partner 25 years ago. The man who had died in a car accident in 1999. The man whose death had made Robert the sole owner of their company and the heir to their combined fortune, except ... Thomas Brennan was very much alive. And according to the timestamp on the photograph ... he was alive as of 3 weeks ago. Think about this for a moment. Imagine discovering that someone whose funeral you attended, whose death changed the entire course of your life, has been alive this whole time? Imagine realizing that everything you built, everything you achieved, was based on a lie so fundamental that it questioned the very nature of your existence. But that photograph contained something even more disturbing. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably there, was Sarah, older, different hair, different clothes, but definitely Sarah. She was standing behind Thomas Brennan, and she was smiling. Not the smile of a hostage. Not the smile of someone being forced into a situation. The smile of someone who was exactly where she wanted to be. The smile of someone who was in control. Robert stared at that photograph for hours. His mind raced through 25 years of memories, trying to process what this meant. If Thomas was alive, if Sarah was with him, then everything Robert had believed about his life, his success, his family, was a carefully orchestrated deception. But there was more in that envelope. A USB drive, unmarked, untraceable, the kind of device that disappears from inventory and doesn't exist in any database. When Robert plugged it into his computer, he found a single video file, no title, no metadata, just 43 minutes of footage that would destroy everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and family. The video began with Sarah's face filling the screen. She looked tired, older, but her eyes were clear. Her voice was steady, and her first words hit Robert like a physical blow. "Hello, Dad. If you're watching this, then you've lived with our lie for exactly 10 years. And now, it's time for you to learn who you really are." The video continued with Sarah explaining something so unthinkable, so perfectly planned, that it redefined the word conspiracy. Thomas Brennan hadn't died in 1999. He had faked his death to escape prosecution for war crimes committed during his time as a government contractor. Sarah hadn't stolen Robert's money in 2014. She had stolen money that Thomas had been funneling through Robert's business for decades without Robert's knowledge. But here's the part that will haunt you. Sarah and Thomas had been working together for years, not as victim and captor, not as criminal and accomplice, as father and daughter. Thomas Brennan was Sarah's biological father. Robert Blackwood, the man who had raised her, loved her, trusted her with everything, was nothing more than an unwitting front for a money laundering operation that spanned 3 decades. In today's world, we talk constantly about fake news, about alternative facts, about not being able to trust what we see and hear. But what happens when your entire life is the fake news? What happens when the people you love most are the ones creating your alternative reality? The video ended with Sarah looking directly into the camera, tears streaming down her face. Dad, Robert, I need you to know that every moment of love I showed you is real. Every hug, every laugh, every time I called you my hero. That was true, but I also need you to know that in 3 days, Thomas and I are going to disappear forever. And this time, we're taking you with us. Because the people who have been hunting us for 10 years, they're coming. And they're done playing games. The screen went black. And in that silence, Robert realized that his doorbell was ringing. Someone was at his door. At 11:47 p.m. on the anniversary of the worst day of his life, someone had come, calling. When he looked through the peephole, his heart stopped. Because standing on his doorstep, looking exactly like she had 10 years ago, was Sarah, and behind her, very much alive and very much in a hurry, was Thomas Brennan. They had come to collect him. The question was, would he go willingly into a life built on truth? Or would he fight to stay in a world built on lies? Some truths are so devastating that they don't just change your understanding of the past, they obliterate your ability to imagine a future. Some secrets are so dark that when they finally surface, they make you question whether ignorance truly was bliss. As Robert stared at Sarah and Thomas standing on his doorstep, his mind raced through 25 years of memories that were suddenly taking on terrifying new meanings. Every business decision, every investment, every dollar that had made him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, all of it, tainted with blood he never knew existed. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And we need to talk now. Because in 6 hours, this house is going to be surrounded by people who want us all dead." They sat in Robert's living room, the same room where Sarah had grown up, where she had done her homework, where she had told him about her dreams for the future. Now, in that same room, she was about to tell him truths that would make him wish he had never been born. "Dad, Robert," Sarah began, struggling with what to call the man who had raised her. "Do you remember the summer of 1998? When you and Thomas landed that massive government contract? The one that made you both millionaires overnight?" Robert nodded. Of course, he remembered. That contract had changed everything. It had been their big break, their ticket to the kind of wealth that transforms generations. That contract, Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice cold and mechanical, was for weapons disposal. The government had massive stockpiles of chemical weapons that needed to be destroyed safely and quietly. "We were paid $47 million to make those weapons disappear." Robert felt his stomach drop. "We destroyed them. I remember the facilities, the safety protocols, the environmental reports. Double quotes. "No," Sarah whispered. "You destroyed empty containers. You destroyed fake documentation. You destroyed evidence of what we actually did with those weapons. Think about this moment. Think about the horror of discovering that your life's work, the foundation of everything you've built, was not just criminal, but genocidal." In our modern world, we hear about war crimes on the news. We see documentaries about atrocities, but we always imagine ourselves as the good guys. We never consider that we might be the monsters in someone else's story. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes dead. "We didn't destroy those weapons, Robert. We sold them. 2 militia groups in Rwanda, 2 warlords in Sierra Leone, 2 dictators in Eastern Europe, $47 million worth of chemical weapons that were used to slaughter innocent families." The room went silent. Robert could hear his own heartbeat, could feel his world collapsing around him. I didn't know. I never would have. That's why we chose you. Thomas continued. You were the perfect frontman. Honest, ethical, completely clueless. While you thought we were running a legitimate disposal operation, I was coordinating international arms deals that resulted in the deaths of over 300,000 people. Sarah's voice broke as she continued the story. When I turned 18 and started working in the business, I began noticing discrepancies in the books. Money that didn't add up. Payments to companies that didn't exist. It took me 4 years to piece together what had really happened. For years of living with a man she thought was her father, discovering that everything about her life was built on mass murder. The people who are hunting us, Sarah explained, aren't criminals. They're survivors. Families of the people who died because of weapons we sold. They've spent decades tracking down everyone involved in those arms deals. Thomas faked his death in 1999 because they were closing in. But they never stopped looking. Robert's mind reeled. The money, all these years, the investments, the business growth, blood money, Thomas said flatly. Every dollar you've made for the last 25 years has been generated from the initial capital we earned selling weapons of mass destruction. Your mansion, your cars, your lifestyle, all of it is paid for with the blood of innocent children. In today's world, we love our origin stories. We celebrate entrepreneurs. We admire self-made millionaires. We aspire to build our own empires. But what happens when you discover that your success story is actually a horror story? What happens when your American dream is someone else's nightmare? Sarah stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. When I discovered the truth, I had 3 choices. I could turn you both in to the authorities and watch you spend the rest of your lives in prison. I could do nothing and live with the knowledge that I was complicit in genocide. Or, I could try to make it right. The money you stole, Robert whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. I didn't steal it, Sarah said firmly. I returned it. Every penny I took from your accounts went to organizations that help survivors of the conflicts where our weapons were used. Refugee camps, medical facilities, schools for orphaned children. I spent 2 years tracking down the families of victims and making anonymous donations. Thomas nodded grimly. She gave away $47 million. Every cent of profit from those original arms deals. But it wasn't enough, because the survivors, they don't want money. They want justice. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Robert a photograph. A group of men and women, all wearing the same expression of cold determination. These are the people who have been hunting us. They call themselves the Reckoning. They've spent 25 years systematically eliminating everyone involved in those arms deals. Politicians, military contractors, businessmen. They've killed 43 people over the last 2 decades. The room felt like it was spinning. Robert looked at the photograph, at faces filled with righteous fury, and realized he was looking at his executioners. Tomorrow morning, Thomas said, they're going to knock on your door. They're going to present you with photographs of the children who died because of weapons you helped sell. They're going to read you the names of every single victim. And, they're going to kill you. Slowly, painfully, the same way their families died. Sarah knelt in front of Robert, taking his hands in hers. That's why I had to make you think I was dead. That's why I had to break your heart. Because I needed 10 years to find a way to save your life. She pulled out a folder. Inside were 3 passports, 3 sets of identification, and 3 airline tickets. We leave tonight. New identities, new lives, new country. But we can never come back. We can never contact anyone from our old lives. We have to disappear completely. Robert stared at the documents. At the choice between certain death and permanent exile. At the daughter who had sacrificed everything to save a man who wasn't even her real father. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. Something I need you to know before you decide. She pulled out one final photograph, a picture of a young girl, maybe 8 years old, smiling at the camera. This is Amara. She died in Rwanda in 1999 when rebels used our chemical weapons to attack her village. She was the same age I was when you first taught me to ride a bicycle. Sarah's voice broke completely. I've been carrying her picture for 5 years. Because every time I looked at you, every time you called me your daughter, every time you told me you were proud of me, I thought about her. I thought about how she would never grow up, never have a father who loved her, never have the life that I got to live because of her death. The truth hung in the air like poison. Robert realized that his entire existence had been subsidized by the murder of children. that every moment of happiness in his life had come at the cost of someone else's suffering. But the most devastating truth of all, Sarah had known this for years, had lived with this knowledge, had still chosen to save him, because sometimes, love transcends blood. Sometimes, the people who aren't your family become more important than the people who are. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is bearing the weight of unforgivable truths, so that the people you care about don't have to. The question now was simple: would Robert choose to live with the truth? Or would he choose to die with his illusions intact? The clock on the wall showed 2:47 a.m. In less than 6 hours, the reckoning would come for him. Time was running out. What do you think Robert should do? Should he flee with Sarah and Thomas, living the rest of his life knowing he profited from genocide? Or should he stay and face the consequences of crimes he never knew he committed? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for the mind-blowing conclusion to this incredible story. Because trust me, you're not going to believe how this ends.